The laughter echoed through the Cherry Creek Mall food court like broken glass, each cackle slicing deeper into what remained of my dignity. I stood there frozen, holding a tray of untouched sushi while my husband Ryan and his 3 best friends doubled over in hysterics at the joke he'd just made at my expense. The punchline had been my weight, my appearance, and apparently my complete lack of worth as a human being, delivered with the casual cruelty that only someone who's supposed to love you can manage. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Come on, Lisa, Ryan wheezed between laughs, wiping tears from his eyes while Jake Peterson nearly choked on his protein smoothie. You know I'm just kidding. Can't you take a joke? The familiar phrase hit me like a slap across the face. The same dismissive words he'd been using for months whenever his humor crossed the line from playful to devastating. The humiliation in that food court wasn't the beginning of my story, but it was certainly the moment I realized I needed a different ending than the one Ryan had written for me. My name is Lisa Chen, and for the past 3 years, I'd been living a life that looked perfect from the outside while slowly rotting from within. At 28, I was supposed to have it all figured out. I had a successful digital marketing consultancy that I'd built from scratch, a beautiful apartment in LoDo with mountain views that made visitors gasp, and a husband who looked like he'd stepped off the cover of Men's Health magazine. Ryan Mitchell was everything I thought I wanted when we met at a networking event 4 years ago. 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle, sun-bleached hair that caught the light just right, and the kind of confident smile that made you believe whatever he was selling. He owned 3 CrossFit gyms across Denver and had the kind of social presence that made him the center of attention wherever we went. When he proposed after 18 months of dating, I said yes without hesitation, convinced I'd won some kind of cosmic lottery. The first year of marriage had been everything I'd dreamed of. Ryan was attentive, supportive of my business, and seemed genuinely proud to introduce me as his wife. We lived in a gorgeous 2-bedroom apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the Denver skyline, complete with a private balcony where we drink wine and plan our future together. I was making more money than I'd ever imagined possible, helping small businesses build their online presence while Ryan's gym empire expanded throughout the metro area. But somewhere around our 2nd anniversary, something shifted. The supportive comments about my work became subtle digs about how much time I spent on my laptop. The compliments about my appearance dried up entirely, replaced by helpful suggestions about workout routines or dietary changes that might benefit me. The romantic dinners became group outings with his friends, where I gradually transformed from participant to audience member for their increasingly elaborate displays of masculine humor. Ryan's inner circle consisted of 3 men who worshipped him with the devotion typically reserved for religious figures. Jake Peterson, his business partner and best friend since college, was a shorter, stockier version of Ryan with the same entitled attitude, but half the charisma. Brad Williams worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep and treated every conversation like a pitch meeting, complete with aggressive enthusiasm and zero genuine interest in anyone else's thoughts. Tony Rodriguez was the quiet one, a software engineer, who seemed normal until you realized he laughed at everything the other 3 said, regardless of whether it was actually funny. These men became the primary audience for Ryan's evolving comedy routine, and I gradually became his favorite target. It started small with gentle teasing about my work habits or my tendency to overthink restaurant menus. The group would chuckle, and I'd force a smile because couples tease each other, right? That's what healthy relationships look like in the movies and social media posts that shaped my understanding of marriage. But the teasing evolved into something darker over the months that followed. Ryan began sharing details about our private life that made me squirm in my seat, while his friends roared with laughter. He'd describe my morning routine in embarrassing detail, complete with sound effects and exaggerated facial expressions that turned intimate moments into public entertainment. He'd mock my business calls, imitating my voice in a high-pitched, whine while explaining marketing concepts to imaginary clients who were apparently too stupid to understand basic concepts. The worst part wasn't the mockery itself, but the way Ryan's friends encouraged it. They'd egg him on with comments like, "Tell them about the thing Lisa does with her hair," or "Do the voice again," treating me like a character in a sitcom, rather than a real person sitting 3 feet away from them. And I let it happen because I was trapped in that terrible space between wanting to defend myself and wanting to be the cool wife who could take a joke. My business suffered as my confidence eroded. I began second-guessing every decision, every client interaction, every creative choice I made. The marketing strategies that had once flowed naturally now felt forced and uncertain. I'd catch myself adopting the defensive posture that had become my default setting around Ryan, hunching my shoulders and speaking more quietly than necessary even during professional calls. The apartment that had once felt like our sanctuary became a stage for Ryan's performances. He'd invite the guys over without warning, transforming our living room into their personal comedy club where I was both the unwilling entertainer and the captive audience. I'd retreat to my home office, but the walls were thin enough that I could hear every cruel impression and mocking observation they made about my appearance, my work, or my personality. Friends and family began to notice the change in me, though I became expert at deflecting their concerns with bright smiles and cheerful deflections. My sister Emma would comment on how quiet I'd become during family dinners, but I'd blame work, stress, or wedding planning fatigue from friends' celebrations. My college roommate Sarah mentioned that I seemed different during our monthly coffee dates, but I'd changed the subject to her dating life or career advancement. The truth was that I was disappearing piece by piece, allowing Ryan's version of me to replace the confident, successful woman I'd worked so hard to become. The Lisa who had built a thriving business from her kitchen table was being replaced by someone who apologized for taking up space and laughed along with jokes designed to diminish her worth. Ryan's mockery reached new heights during social gatherings. At barbecues and dinner parties, he'd regale the group with stories about my supposed failures and inadequacies, always framed as loving teasing but delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly which insecurities to target. He'd describe my cooking disasters with theatrical horror, my exercise attempts with condescending amusement, and my business successes with subtle implications that luck played a larger role than skill. The pattern became predictable and soul-crushing. Ryan would start with something seemingly innocent, like mentioning that I'd tried a new recipe or joined a yoga class, but then he'd add details that twisted the story into something humiliating, complete with physical comedy and vocal impressions that reduced me to a punchline. His friends would laugh harder with each embellishment, encouraging him to push further, into territory that left me feeling exposed and worthless. I began to dread social situations that had once brought me joy. Dinner parties became endurance tests where I'd count the minutes until I could politely escape. Company events for Ryan's gym became performances where I'd smile and nod while he entertained clients with stories about my alleged quirks and failures. Even casual encounters with neighbors or acquaintances became opportunities for Ryan to showcase his wit at my expense. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest part of Ryan's campaign. By consistently portraying me as foolish, incompetent, or ridiculous, he gradually trained our social circle to see me as someone whose feelings didn't require serious consideration. People would laugh along with his jokes because Ryan was charming and popular, and challenging him would risk their own social standing within the group. My work clients began to sense my diminished confidence during video calls and in-person meetings. The authoritative voice I'd once used to guide business owners through complex marketing strategies became hesitant and apologetic. I'd catch myself qualifying every recommendation with phrases like, "You might want to consider," or "This probably won't work, but maybe," instead of the confident assertions that had built my reputation. The financial implications of my eroding self-confidence began to manifest in lost clients and reduced rates. Business owners who had once sought my expertise started looking elsewhere for marketing support, perhaps sensing that I no longer believed in my own abilities. The steady income that had allowed me to contribute equally to our household expenses began to fluctuate, giving Ryan additional ammunition for his comedy routine. Sleep became elusive as I'd lie awake replaying the day's humiliations and planning defenses for tomorrow's anticipated attacks. I'd rehearse witty comebacks that I'd never have the courage to deliver, or plan graceful exits from situations I couldn't avoid. The mental energy required to constantly brace for mockery was exhausting, leaving me drained and irritable even during the rare moments when Ryan was being kind. My relationship with food became complicated as Ryan's jokes about my eating habits and appearance took root in my psyche. I'd find myself avoiding certain foods or skipping meals entirely, not because I wanted to lose weight, but because I couldn't bear the thought of providing more material for his entertainment. The woman who had once enjoyed cooking elaborate meals for friends now subsisted on protein bars and salads, afraid that any culinary adventure might become tomorrow's punchline. Exercise, which had once been a source of joy and stress relief, became another minefield of potential humiliation. Ryan would offer to train me at his gym, but the sessions inevitably became public demonstrations of my inadequacy compared to his other clients. He'd adjust my form with exaggerated patience, as if teaching a child, while his friends watched from nearby equipment. The gym that should have been empowering became another stage for my public diminishment. The morning of the Cherry Creek Mall incident, I should have known something was building toward a breaking point. Ryan had been unusually animated during breakfast, texting with his friends and occasionally chuckling at his phone in a way that made my stomach clench with anticipation. He'd suggested lunch at the mall with Jake, Brad, and Tony, framing it as a casual get-together but insisting I join them despite my obvious reluctance. I'd spent extra time getting ready that morning, choosing clothes that I hoped would minimize Ryan's potential targets for mockery. I avoided anything too tight or too loose, too colorful or too plain, settling on a simple black dress that had once made me feel confident but now felt like camouflage. I did my makeup carefully, knowing that any imperfection would likely become part of Ryan's performance for his audience. The drive to Cherry Creek was tense with unspoken anticipation. Ryan seemed barely able to contain his excitement about something, humming tunelessly and drumming his fingers on the steering wheel while I stared out the window at the familiar Denver landscape. The mountains that usually lifted my spirits seemed distant and indifferent, offering no comfort for whatever ordeal awaited me. Meeting his friends at the food court felt like walking into an ambush, though I couldn't have explained why at the time. Jake, Brad, and Tony were already seated at a large table, their body language suggesting they were in on some kind of joke that hadn't been shared yet. They greeted me with the kind of overly enthusiastic hellos that adults use with children, complete with exaggerated smiles that didn't reach their eyes. The conversation during lunch was typical of our group dynamics, with Ryan holding court while his friends provided the appropriate reactions to his stories and observations. I'd learned to contribute minimally to these gatherings, offering occasional nods and smiles while avoiding any statements that might become fodder for ridicule. But something felt different about this particular meal, an electric anticipation that suggested the main event was yet to come. When Ryan stood up to get dessert, claiming he wanted to surprise everyone with something special, I should have recognized the setup. He returned not with food, but with his phone in hand and a smile that made my blood run cold. The others immediately leaned in, their faces bright with anticipation as Ryan announced that he had something hilarious to share. What followed was the most systematic destruction of my dignity I had ever experienced. Ryan had apparently been collecting voice recordings of me from our private conversations, calls with clients, and even arguments we'd had in the privacy of our apartment. But he hadn't just recorded me. He'd edited the clips together into a compilation that made me sound like a complete fool, taking my words out of context and splicing them with sound effects that transformed normal conversations into comedy gold. The first clip was from a client call where I'd been explaining social media analytics, but Ryan had edited it to make me sound like I was speaking gibberish while trying to appear knowledgeable about something I clearly didn't understand. His friends erupted in laughter as my voice, distorted and out of context, seemed to confirm every stereotype about women in business trying to sound smarter than they actually were. The second clip was from an argument we'd had about household responsibilities, but the editing made it sound like I was having a complete emotional breakdown over trivial matters. Ryan had isolated my most frustrated moments and strung them together without the context of his own provocations, creating a portrait of an unreasonable, hysterical woman who couldn't handle basic adult responsibilities. But the final clip was the most devastating. It was from an intimate conversation we'd had months earlier when I'd confided my insecurities about my appearance and my fear that I wasn't good enough for him. Ryan had recorded my most vulnerable moments and transformed them into entertainment for his friends, complete with his own commentary that painted me as pathetically needy and delusional about my own attractiveness. The laughter that followed. Each clip felt like physical blows, but it was the look of gleeful triumph on Ryan's face that finally broke something inside me. This wasn't casual cruelty or thoughtless humor. This was calculated psychological warfare designed to completely destroy my sense of self-worth while entertaining his audience. He had weaponized my trust and love against me, turning our most private moments into public spectacle. As I stood there holding my untouched sushi tray, watching 4 grown men laugh at the systematic destruction of my dignity, something crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. This wasn't going to continue. I wasn't going to spend another day, another hour, another minute being Ryan Mitchell's favorite punchline. The woman who had built a successful business from nothing was still inside me somewhere, and she was about to remind everyone exactly what she was capable of when properly motivated. I set down my tray with deliberate precision, looked directly at Ryan's flushed, laughing face, and smiled in a way that made his laughter die in his throat. "That was really funny, honey," I said, in a voice so calm it surprised even me. "I can't wait to share some things that will make everyone laugh even harder." The silence that followed was immediate and complete, broken only by the ambient noise of the food court around us. Ryan's friends stopped laughing and looked between us with the uncomfortable awareness that they had just witnessed something that couldn't be taken back. But I was already walking away, my mind racing with possibilities and my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The humiliation was complete, but so was my transformation from victim to someone with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from fighting back. Ryan Mitchell had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. The drive home from Cherry Creek Mall passed in a blur of rage and determination. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white, but my mind was clearer than it had been in months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ryan had chosen to ride with Jake, probably to rehash his triumphant performance and plan their next entertainment session. I was grateful for the solitude because it gave me time to think without having to maintain the facade of normalcy that had become second nature. Our LoDo apartment felt different when I walked through the door, as if Ryan's betrayal had somehow altered the molecular structure of the space we shared. The sleek furniture and carefully curated artwork that had once represented our success, as a couple now seemed like props in an elaborate stage production. I moved through the rooms like a stranger, seeing everything with new eyes and understanding that my life here had been built on foundations of sand. I went straight to my home, office and locked the door, something I'd never done before. The familiar space with its organized desk, dual monitors, and inspiration board felt like a sanctuary, the one place in our apartment where I still felt like myself. I sat in my ergonomic chair and stared at the Denver skyline through the window, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened and what I needed to do next. The first step was obvious, but terrifying. I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about Ryan's pattern of behavior over the past year. Every humiliating joke, every public embarrassment, every moment when he'd made me feel small and worthless in front of others. The list grew longer than I'd expected, filling page after page with incidents I'd tried to forget or excuse as harmless teasing. As I typed, patterns emerged that I hadn't recognized while living through them. Ryan's mockery had escalated systematically, testing my boundaries and gradually pushing further as I failed to defend myself. He'd identified my insecurities with surgical precision and weaponized them for entertainment value. Most disturbing of all, he'd been recording our private conversations for months, building an arsenal of ammunition for his public performances. The violation of privacy was staggering when I really considered its implications. Ryan had betrayed not just my trust, but my basic right to speak freely in my own home. Every vulnerable moment, every confession of doubt or fear, every intimate conversation had been potential content for his comedy routine. I felt sick thinking about what other recordings he might have and how he planned to use them. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan asking where I'd gone and whether I was okay. The casual tone of his message, as if nothing significant had happened, filled me with fresh anger. He genuinely seemed to believe that I should be able to absorb unlimited abuse as long as it entertained his friends. The lack of any acknowledgement or apology confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. This wasn't going to get better on its own. I ignored his text and continued working on my documentation, adding timestamps and witness names wherever possible. Jake, Brad, and Tony had been present for most of Ryan's performances, making them complicit in the pattern of abuse even if they hadn't initiated it. Their laughter and encouragement had enabled Ryan's behavior to escalate, and they'd benefited from the entertainment at my expense. The sound of Ryan's key in the front door made my stomach clench, but I didn't emerge from my office. I could hear him moving through the apartment, probably looking for me and wondering why I wasn't greeting him with my usual forced smile and questions about his day. His footsteps paused outside my office door, and I held my breath as he tested the handle. "Lisa?" His voice carried a note of confusion that might have been genuine. "Why is your door locked? Are you working on something important?" I didn't answer. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken implications. After a few moments, I heard his footsteps retreat toward the kitchen, followed by the sounds of him preparing his post-workout protein shake. The normalcy of his routine felt surreal given the earthquake that had just occurred in our relationship. My phone rang an hour later, displaying my sister Emma's name. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up on the fourth ring. Emma lived in Boulder and worked as a therapist, which meant she had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong even from 30 miles away. "Hey, Lisa." Emma's warm voice filled the silence of my office. "I was just thinking about you and wanted to check in. How are things going?" The simple question broke something loose in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I was crying. Not the quiet tears I'd learned to shed silently during Ryan's performances, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I'd been trying to ignore for months. "Lisa, what's wrong? Talk to me." Between gasps, I managed to tell Emma about the mall incident, though I could barely get through the description of Ryan's recording compilation without breaking down again. My sister listened without interruption, making small sounds of sympathy and outrage that told me she understood the gravity of what I was describing. "Jesus Christ, Lisa," Emma said when I finally finished. "That's not teasing or jokes between spouses. That's emotional abuse, and it's escalating. You need to get out of there." Hearing the words emotional abuse applied to my marriage felt like a physical shock. I'd been so focused on trying to be the cool wife who could take a joke that I'd failed to recognize the systematic nature of Ryan's behavior. But Emma was right. This wasn't about my inability to handle humor. It was about deliberate psychological manipulation designed to control and diminish me. "I don't know how to leave," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Everything is so tangled up. The apartment, our finances, our social circle. And what if I'm overreacting? What if I really am too sensitive?" Emma's response was swift and certain. "You're not overreacting. You're underreacting, if anything. Lisa, The woman I know built a successful business from scratch and used to eat challenges for breakfast. If Ryan has convinced you that you're too sensitive, that's part of the manipulation. We talked for another hour, with Emma helping me understand the psychological dynamics of what I'd been experiencing. She explained how emotional abusers often isolated their victims by making them doubt their own perceptions and reactions. Ryan's pattern of public humiliation followed by private dismissal of my concerns was textbook manipulation designed to make me question my own sanity. "You need professional help," Emma said as our conversation wound down. "Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because you need someone who understands these dynamics to help you navigate getting out safely. And Lisa? Document everything. Every conversation, every incident, every recording he might have. If this gets legal, you'll need evidence." After hanging up with Emma, I felt simultaneously more grounded and more afraid than I had all day. Having my experience validated by someone I trusted made the abuse impossible to minimize or excuse. But it also meant facing the reality that my marriage was not just unhappy, but actively harmful to my mental health and well-being. I spent the rest of the evening researching therapists who specialized in emotional abuse while avoiding any interaction with Ryan. He knocked on my office door twice, both times asking if I wanted dinner or if I was planning to emerge before bedtime. I claimed to be working on an urgent project, which wasn't entirely false, since documenting the destruction of my marriage felt like the most important work I'd ever done. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call that would change everything. I was in my office early, having barely slept, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't answer unknown calls, but something made me pick up this one. "Is this Lisa Chen?" The voice was crisp and professional, belonging to an older woman with the kind of authority that commanded attention. "Yes, this is Lisa. Who's calling?" "My name is Margaret Thompson, but most people call me Maggie. I own Thompson Industries, and I believe we have some mutual acquaintances. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this morning." Thompson Industries was a name I recognized from business journals and local news coverage. Maggie Thompson was a legendary figure in Denver's business community, having built a tech consulting empire from nothing and becoming one of the wealthiest self-made women in Colorado. I couldn't imagine what she wanted with me, but curiosity overrode my emotional exhaustion. "I'm flattered by your interest, Ms. Thompson, but I'm not sure what we'd have to discuss." "Please, call me Maggie, and I think you'd be surprised. I have a proposition that might interest you, especially given recent developments in your personal life." The comment about my personal life sent a chill down my spine. How could a stranger know anything about what happened yesterday at the mall? But Maggie's tone wasn't threatening. If anything, she sounded sympathetic. "How do you know about my personal life? Let's just say that Denver's business community is smaller than people think, and certain behaviors don't go unnoticed. Would you be willing to meet me at the Perfect Grind on 17th Street in an hour?" Something in her voice suggested this wasn't a casual networking opportunity. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her, driven by curiosity and the desperate need to talk to someone who existed outside of Ryan's sphere of influence. The Perfect Grind was an upscale coffee shop in downtown Denver that catered to business professionals and deal makers. I arrived early and chose a corner table that would allow for private conversation while still being public enough to feel safe. Maggie Thompson was easy to spot when she arrived. A woman in her mid-60s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She moved through the coffee shop with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command, scanning the room until her eyes landed on me. Her smile was warm but assessing as she approached my table, and I had the distinct impression that I was being evaluated according to criteria I didn't understand. "Lisa? Thank you for meeting me on such short notice," Maggie said as she settled into the chair across from me. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering for both of us. I find that business discussions go better when nobody's distracted by menu decisions. As if on cue, a barista appeared with 2 expertly crafted lattes and what appeared to be expensive pastries from a local bakery. The level of orchestration suggested that Maggie had planned this meeting carefully, which only deepened my confusion about her motives. Ms. Thompson, I have to admit I'm completely mystified about why you wanted to meet with me. I run a small marketing consultancy, not exactly the kind of business that would interest someone at your level. Maggie's laugh was genuine and surprisingly warm. Please, call me Maggie, and you're underestimating yourself, though I suspect that's become a habit recently. I've been watching your work for several months, Lisa. Your digital marketing strategies are innovative and effective, and your client retention rate is impressive for someone operating without significant resources. The praise felt foreign, after months of Ryan's constant criticism, but Maggie's tone suggested she wasn't offering empty flattery. She pulled out a tablet and showed me a detailed analysis of my business metrics that was both comprehensive and accurate. How did you compile this information? I asked, feeling both impressed and slightly unnerved by the thoroughness of her research. I make it my business to identify talented entrepreneurs who might benefit from partnership opportunities. But I have to admit, my interest in you became more personal when I learned about your husband's behavior yesterday. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. I don't understand. How could you possibly know about what happened at the mall? Maggie's expression grew serious, and she leaned forward with the intensity of someone delivering important information. Lisa, my daughter Nicole works at the same gym where your husband trains his clients. She was having lunch with friends at Cherry Creek yesterday when she witnessed what happened in the food court. Nicole Mitchell. Ryan had mentioned her occasionally as one of his newer clients, describing her as some rich woman who paid premium rates for personal training sessions. The idea that she had witnessed my humiliation made me want to disappear under the table. Nicole was appalled by what she saw, Maggie continued. She said your husband was showing recordings of private conversations to his friends and encouraging them to laugh at your expense. When she told me about it last night, I decided I needed to meet you. Why? The question came out more sharply than I intended, but I needed to understand Maggie's motives. I'm sure you see plenty of unhappy marriages in your social circle. What makes mine special? Maggie was quiet for a moment, studying my face with those intelligent blue eyes. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of personal experience. Because 30 years ago, I was sitting exactly where you are now. Different circumstances, but the same pattern of systematic humiliation and control. My first husband thought it was hilarious to mock my business aspirations in front of his colleagues, to share private conversations that made me sound foolish, to convince everyone around us that I was lucky he put up with my delusions of competence. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Maggie Thompson, one of the most successful businesswomen in Colorado, had survived the same kind of emotional abuse I was experiencing. She understood the shame, the self-doubt, the gradual erosion of identity that came from loving someone who treated you as entertainment. What happened? I asked quietly. I stayed too long because I thought I could fix things, thought I could become the wife he wanted if I just tried harder. But abuse escalates, Lisa. It never gets better on its own. And the longer you stay, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before it started. Maggie reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. The gesture was maternal and surprisingly comforting from someone I'd just met. The difference between us is that you have something I didn't have back then: resources and allies. I had to claw my way out alone, building my business while fighting divorce proceedings and social ostracism. You don't have to do this by yourself. I don't understand what you're offering. Partnership, alliance, justice. Maggie's smile turned sharp and predatory. Your husband thinks he's dealing with an isolated victim who has no options. He's about to learn that he's actually tangled with someone who has very powerful friends. She opened her tablet again and showed me a different set of documents. Financial records, business licenses, tax filings, a comprehensive dossier on Ryan's gym empire that revealed details I'd never known about my own husband's business operations. Ryan's business is more leveraged than he lets on, Maggie explained. He's been taking significant loans against future revenue projections that may not materialize. His partnership with Jake Peterson is built on handshake agreements that wouldn't hold up under legal scrutiny. Most interesting of all, several of his business practices would not withstand regulatory investigation. I stared at the documents, trying to process the implications of what Maggie was showing me. How did you get this information? When you've been in business as long as I have, you develop networks of information. The fitness industry in Denver is surprisingly small, and certain financial irregularities tend to come to light when someone knows where to look. The coffee shop around us continued its normal bustle of business meetings and casual conversations. But I felt like Maggie and I were existing in a separate reality where impossible things were becoming possible. This woman I'd never met was offering me resources and support that could fundamentally alter the power dynamic in my marriage. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. I'm proposing that we teach your husband what happens when someone underestimates the wrong woman. Ryan thinks he's married to a powerless victim who will tolerate unlimited abuse as long as he frames it as humor. He's about to discover that he's actually married to someone with access to resources and influence he can't imagine. Maggie outlined her proposal with the precision of someone who had orchestrated corporate takeovers and hostile acquisitions. The plan involved legal strategy, financial investigation, and social consequences that would systematically dismantle the life Ryan had built while entertaining himself at my expense. This isn't about revenge, Maggie clarified when she saw my expression. This is about justice and protection. Ryan's behavior follows a predictable pattern that will only escalate if left unchecked. The recordings he made of your private conversations represent a serious violation that could have legal implications. More importantly, his willingness to humiliate you publicly suggests someone who lacks the empathy and impulse control necessary for healthy relationships. The scope of what Maggie was proposing felt overwhelming, but it also felt like the first real hope I'd experienced in months. For the first time since standing in that food court, I didn't feel completely powerless and alone. Why would you do this for someone you don't even know? I asked. Because I remember what it felt like to be trapped and isolated, convinced that I deserved whatever treatment I received. And because Ryan Mitchell represents a type of man who thrives on exploiting women's trust and vulnerability. Stopping him isn't just about helping you. It's about preventing him from doing this to the next woman who falls for his charm. Maggie's phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced at it with satisfaction. That's my attorney confirming our 3:00 appointment. If you're willing to move forward, we can have preliminary legal protections in place by the end of the week. The decision felt momentous and terrifying, but as I sat there looking at this remarkable woman who had survived and thrived after experiences similar to my own, I realized that I'd already made my choice. Ryan had systematically destroyed my confidence and self-worth, but he hadn't destroyed my fundamental intelligence and strength. Those qualities had just been buried under months of gaslighting and manipulation. What do I need to do? I asked. Maggie's smile was fierce and encouraging. First, we document everything. Every recording, every incident, every financial detail about your marriage and his business. Then we build a strategy that ensures Ryan faces appropriate consequences for his behavior while protecting you from retaliation. She handed me a business card with contact information for her attorney, a private investigator, and a therapist who specialized in abuse recovery. The level of resources at her disposal was staggering, but more important than the money was the expertise and experience she brought to understanding men like Ryan. One more thing, Maggie said as we prepared to leave. Don't let Ryan know that anything has changed. Continue acting normally while we gather information and build our case. Can you do that? I thought about all the months I'd spent pretending to find his cruelty amusing. All the times I'd smiled through humiliation and laughed at jokes designed to diminish me. Playing a role for a few more days in service of justice felt entirely manageable. I've been acting for months, I replied. A few more days won't be a problem. As I drove home from the coffee shop, I felt like a completely different person than the woman who had fled Cherry Creek Mall less than 24 hours earlier. The victim who had stood frozen while her husband entertained his friends with recordings of her private vulnerabilities was gone, replaced by someone with allies, resources, and a plan for fighting back. Ryan was in the kitchen when I returned to our apartment, preparing his usual post-workout meal of grilled chicken and vegetables. He looked up when I entered, his expression cautiously hopeful. "Hey, babe. Feeling better today? You seemed pretty stressed yesterday after lunch." The casual way he referenced the most humiliating experience of my marriage made my skin crawl, but I forced a smile and nodded. "Just work stuff. You know how I get when I'm dealing with difficult clients." "Yeah, you definitely overthink things." "Sometimes," Ryan replied, apparently relieved that I wasn't going to make an issue of his entertainment performance. "The guys thought you seemed pretty upset when you left yesterday. I told them you've been under a lot of pressure lately." The idea that Ryan and his friends had discussed my emotional state after humiliating me publicly made me want to scream. But I maintained my facade of normalcy. "I appreciate you covering for me. I know I haven't been much fun to be around lately." Ryan's smile was warm and seemingly genuine, the same expression that had made me fall in love with him 4 years earlier, but now I could see the calculation behind it, the careful modulation designed to keep me off balance and accepting blame for his behavior. "You're always fun to be around," he said, moving closer to wrap his arms around me. "Maybe we should plan something special for this weekend. Just the two of us, no pressure." The embrace that should have been comforting felt like a cage, but I forced myself to relax into it and return his affection. Playing the role of reconciliation would buy me the time I needed to execute Maggie's plan while keeping Ryan's suspicions dormant. "That sounds perfect," I murmured against his chest, already counting the hours until his world would begin falling apart around him. That night, as Ryan slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake planning the systematic destruction of the life he'd built through charm, manipulation, and cruelty. The helpless woman he'd married was gone forever, replaced by someone with the resources and determination to ensure that his treatment of me would have consequences he couldn't imagine. Tomorrow would begin the most important performance of my life, but this time I would be directing the show. The law offices of Hayes, Morrison & Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown Denver high-rise, and walking through their marble lobby felt like entering a different universe from the cramped spaces where I usually conducted business. Meetings. Maggie had insisted on using her personal attorney rather than someone from my usual network, explaining that Daniel Hayes specialized in complex cases involving financial fraud and domestic manipulation. Daniel turned out to be a man in his early 50s with the kind of sharp intelligence that made you understand why Maggie trusted him with sensitive matters. His corner office overlooked the Denver skyline, and the walls were lined with law, degrees from prestigious universities alongside photos of him with various political figures and business leaders. "Maggie has explained the broad strokes of your situation," Daniel said as we settled into leather chairs around a polished conference table. "But I need to understand the specifics before we can develop an effective strategy. Tell me about your husband's business operations and your role in the household finances." For the next 2 hours, I provided a detailed account of Ryan's gym empire, our shared financial arrangements, and the gradual escalation of his public humiliation campaign. Daniel took notes with the precision of someone building a legal case, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed aspects of Ryan's behavior I hadn't considered significant. "The recordings are the most serious issue from a legal standpoint," Daniel explained when I finished my account. Colorado requires consent from all parties for recording private conversations. If Ryan has been secretly recording you in your home, that's a potential criminal violation regardless of how he's using the material. The revelation that Ryan might have committed actual crimes was both validating and terrifying. I'd been so focused on the emotional damage of his mockery that I hadn't considered the legal implications of his methods. What about the financial aspects? Maggie asked, consulting notes she'd taken during our coffee meeting. Lisa mentioned that she contributes equally to household expenses, despite Ryan's business appearing more successful. Daniel's expression grew more serious as I explained our financial arrangements. Ryan handled most of our joint expenses through his business accounts, claiming it was more efficient for tax purposes. I contributed a fixed monthly amount to our shared checking account, but I'd never had detailed access to his business finances or our overall financial picture. That's concerning, Daniel said, making additional notes. Financial control is often a component of emotional abuse, and the lack of transparency suggests your husband may be hiding assets or debts. We'll need a forensic accountant to examine the complete financial picture before proceeding. The scope of the investigation Maggie was proposing became clearer as Daniel outlined the various professionals who would be involved. A private investigator would document Ryan's activities and business practices, a forensic accountant would examine his financial records, and a therapist specializing in abuse recovery would help me understand the psychological dynamics I'd been experiencing. The goal isn't just to gather evidence, Daniel explained. We want to understand the complete pattern of behavior and identify all the ways Ryan has been violating your rights and well-being. That comprehensive picture will inform our strategy for both legal proceedings and personal protection. Maggie leaned forward with the intensity she brought to all business discussions. Daniel, I want you to understand that this isn't just about divorce proceedings or financial settlements. Ryan Mitchell represents a pattern of behavior that's likely to continue with future partners unless he faces significant consequences. The idea that Ryan might subject other women to the same treatment he'd inflicted on me added urgency to our planning. I thought about his interactions with female clients at his gym, the way he charmed potential romantic partners before revealing his true nature, and the likelihood that his behavior would escalate without intervention. What kind of consequences are we talking about? I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. Daniel and Maggie exchanged a glance that suggested they'd already discussed possibilities I wasn't aware of. That depends on what we discover during the investigation, Daniel replied carefully. If Ryan has been violating recording laws, engaging in financial fraud, or committing other crimes, there could be criminal charges. At minimum, we can ensure that his behavior becomes public knowledge in ways that protect future potential victims. The meeting concluded with me signing retainer agreements and authorization forms that would allow Daniel's team to begin their investigation. The financial commitment was significant, but Maggie insisted on covering all costs as part of what she called an investment in justice. Money shouldn't be a barrier to protecting yourself, Maggie said as we left Daniel's office. Consider this a loan if it makes you more comfortable, but don't let financial concerns prevent you from taking action. The private investigator Daniel recommended was a woman named Rachel Kim, who operated from a nondescript office building in the tech center. Rachel had spent 15 years with the FBI before starting her own firm specializing in corporate fraud and domestic investigations. Her approach was methodical and professional, treating my case with the same seriousness she'd once brought to federal criminal investigations. The challenge with emotional abuse cases is that much of the evidence is behavioral rather than documentary, Rachel explained during our initial meeting. We need to establish patterns, document incidents, and gather testimony from witnesses who can corroborate your account. Rachel's investigation would focus on several areas: Ryan's business practices and financial management, his treatment of employees and clients, his relationships with friends and family, and any evidence of Similar behavior with previous partners. The scope was comprehensive and slightly overwhelming. Your husband's social media presence will be particularly valuable, Rachel continued, showing me printed screenshots from Ryan's various accounts. He's documented much of his behavior himself, apparently not realizing that public mockery of a spouse could be evidence of abuse. The screenshots Rachel had gathered were damning when viewed as a collection rather than individual posts. Ryan had shared photos, videos, and commentary about our relationship that consistently portrayed me as foolish, incompetent, or ridiculous. The pattern was clear and systematic when assembled chronologically. We'll also be interviewing people in your social circle, Rachel said. Friends, family members, business associates, anyone who has witnessed Ryan's behavior toward you. The goal is to establish that this wasn't just private disagreements, but a public campaign of humiliation. The idea of our friends and family being questioned about my marriage was embarrassing, but Rachel assured me that the interviews would be conducted sensitively. Most people who witness emotional abuse recognize it as wrong, even if they don't know how to intervene. They'll likely be relieved to have someone take the situation seriously. My sister Emma was the first person Rachel interviewed, and her account provided crucial corroboration of the timeline and escalation of Ryan's behavior. Emma had documented her concerns in text messages and journal entries, creating an independent record of my deteriorating emotional state over the past year. Emma's testimony will be particularly valuable because she's trained to recognize psychological manipulation, Rachel explained after completing the interview. Her professional assessment carries weight that casual observations from friends might not. The forensic accountant Maggie hired was equally thorough in examining Ryan's business finances. Within a week, she'd identified several concerning patterns in his financial management that suggested either incompetence or deliberate deception. Your husband's businesses are significantly more leveraged than his lifestyle would suggest, the accountant reported during a conference call with Daniel and Maggie. He's been using credit lines and loans to maintain cash flow while extracting maximum compensation for personal expenses. The financial analysis revealed that Ryan's gym empire was essentially a house of cards built on projected future revenue that might not materialize. His partnership with Jake Peterson was structured in ways that left both of them personally liable for business debts, and several of their expansion plans relied on financing that assumed continued growth in a highly competitive market. More concerning is the lack of separation between business and personal expenses, the accountant continued. Ryan has been using business accounts to pay for personal purchases, including expensive entertainment and travel that he's categorized as marketing expenses. The revelation that Ryan had been essentially embezzling from his own businesses to fund his lifestyle was both shocking and somehow unsurprising. His willingness to violate my privacy and trust suggested someone with limited respect for boundaries in general. Maggie listened to the financial report with the focused attention she brought to all business matters. What are the potential legal implications of these financial irregularities? If the IRS audited these businesses, Ryan and Jake could face significant penalties for misclassifying personal expenses as business deductions. More seriously, if any of their lenders discovered the actual financial situation, they could demand immediate repayment of outstanding loans. The idea that Ryan's entire lifestyle was built on financial quicksand added another dimension to our strategy. His public persona as a successful businessman was as much of a fabrication as his claims to be a loving husband. While the professionals gathered evidence and built our case, I had to maintain the pretense of normalcy in my daily interactions with Ryan. The performance required skills I'd developed during months of survival, but now I was acting with purpose rather than simply enduring abuse. Ryan seemed pleased that I'd apparently recovered from my overreaction to his food court entertainment. He began planning a couple's weekend trip to Vail, apparently confident that our relationship had returned to its previous dynamic where he could mock me publicly without serious consequences. I was thinking we could invite Jake and his girlfriend, Ryan suggested over dinner. Maybe Brad and Tony, too. It could be like a mini vacation for the whole group. The idea of being trapped in a mountain resort with Ryan's enablers while maintaining my facade felt like a special kind of torture, but I forced enthusiasm into my voice. That sounds fun. I've been working too much lately anyway. Ryan's smile was genuine and warm, the same expression that had convinced me to marry him. But now I could see the calculation behind it, the careful management of my emotions designed to keep me compliant and available for future entertainment. The weekend. Trip planning gave me opportunities to gather additional evidence while appearing supportive of Ryan's social activities. I volunteered to help coordinate accommodations and activities, which allowed me to document the group dynamics and witness preparation for what would likely be another humiliation session. The guys are already joking about bringing cameras, Ryan mentioned while reviewing restaurant reservations. We should probably plan some group activities that would make for good content. The casual way he referenced creating content from our private vacation made my skin crawl, but I nodded enthusiastically. What kind of activities were you thinking? Maybe some hiking, definitely some drinking games, probably some karaoke. You know how funny you get when you're trying to sing. The implication that my attempts at karaoke were intended as entertainment for his friends rather than simple fun was typical of how Ryan had learned to frame every aspect of our relationship. Nothing I did was simply my own experience. Everything was potential material for his performances. Rachel used the weekend trip planning as an opportunity to install discreet recording equipment in my phone and purse. The technology was sophisticated enough to capture high-quality audio without being detectable, and it would provide documented evidence of any harassment or humiliation that occurred during the trip. The recordings will be crucial if this case goes to court, Rachel explained as she demonstrated the equipment. Ryan's own words describing his intentions and reactions will be more powerful than any testimony we could provide. The ethical implications of secretly recording Ryan felt strange given my anger about his violations of my privacy, but Daniel assured me that the legal and moral situations were completely different. You're gathering evidence of ongoing abuse to protect yourself and potentially others, Daniel explained. Ryan was recording private conversations for entertainment purposes. The motivations and contexts make these entirely different ethical situations. Maggie insisted on providing additional support beyond the professional team she'd assembled. She arranged for me to begin working with Dr. Sarah Martinez, a therapist who specialized in helping abuse survivors understand the psychological dynamics they'd experienced and develop strategies for healing. Understanding why you accepted Ryan's treatment will be crucial for preventing future manipulation, Dr. Martinez explained during our first session. Emotional abusers are skilled at identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities that even their victims might not recognize. The therapy sessions were emotionally difficult but intellectually illuminating. Dr. Martinez helped me understand how Ryan had systematically undermined my confidence and isolated me from support systems. The process had been so gradual that I'd adapted to each escalation without recognizing the overall pattern. Abusers often target successful, independent people because the contrast makes the eventual control more satisfying, Dr. Martinez explained. Ryan didn't choose you despite your strength. He chose you because of it. Breaking down someone accomplished provides a greater sense of power than controlling someone who was already vulnerable. Understanding the psychological framework of what I'd experienced was both validating and infuriating. Ryan's treatment of me hadn't been random cruelty or relationship conflict. It had been a deliberate campaign designed to transform me into someone who would tolerate unlimited abuse without resistance. The investigation team made rapid progress in documenting Ryan's pattern of behavior across multiple contexts. Rachel discovered that several of his female clients had left his gym after experiencing what they described as inappropriate behavior during training sessions. While none had filed formal complaints, their accounts suggested a consistent pattern of boundary violations and subtle humiliation. Ryan seems to enjoy making women feel inadequate about their physical abilities and appearance, Rachel reported. Multiple former clients described feeling worse about themselves after training sessions rather than empowered or improved. The pattern extended to his previous romantic relationships as well. Rachel tracked down 2 women Ryan had dated before me, and both described similar escalations of public mockery and private manipulation. One had ended their relationship after Ryan showed intimate photos of her to his friends without consent, while the other left after discovering he'd been sharing details of their sex life as entertainment material. "This isn't isolated behavior specific to your marriage," Rachel concluded. "Ryan appears to have a consistent pattern of using intimate relationships as opportunities for psychological manipulation and public humiliation." The evidence Rachel gathered painted a picture of someone who derived pleasure from undermining women's confidence and self-worth. My experience wasn't unique or exceptional. It was part of a behavioral pattern that would likely continue unless significantly disrupted. Daniel used the investigation findings to develop a comprehensive legal strategy that addressed both immediate protection and long-term consequences. The plan involved multiple simultaneous actions designed to dismantle Ryan's life with the same systematic approach he'd used to undermine mine. "We'll file for divorce and protective orders simultaneously," Daniel explained during a strategy meeting. "The timing will prevent Ryan from hiding assets or destroying evidence while ensuring you have legal protection from retaliation. The protective orders would be based on the documented pattern of emotional abuse and privacy violations, while the divorce proceedings would focus on financial fraud and the misuse of marital assets." Additionally, Daniel planned to report Ryan's recording activities to law enforcement for potential criminal prosecution. "The goal is to create multiple pressures simultaneously," Daniel continued. "Ryan will have to deal with legal, financial, and social consequences all at once, preventing him from focusing his manipulation skills on any single front." Maggie's role in the strategy extended beyond financial support to active participation in dismantling Ryan's social and professional networks. Her connections in Denver's business community would ensure that Ryan's behavior became widely known among potential clients and business partners. "Men like Ryan rely on charm and reputation to maintain their positions," Maggie explained. "Once their true character becomes public knowledge, those assets become liabilities that accelerate their downfall." The plan also included protection for me during the transition period when Ryan's world would be collapsing around him. Maggie arranged for temporary housing in a secure building downtown, complete with 24-hour security and underground parking, that would prevent any confrontations or harassment. "Abusers often escalate their behavior when they lose control," Dr. Martinez warned during one of our sessions. "Ryan's reaction to discovering your actions could be unpredictable and potentially dangerous." The safety planning was comprehensive and slightly terrifying in its implications. Rachel provided training on recognizing surveillance, Daniel arranged for expedited protective orders, and Maggie's security team developed protocols for monitoring Ryan's activities during the critical transition period. As the weekend trip to Vail approached, all the pieces of our strategy were falling into place. The evidence gathering was complete, the legal documents were prepared, and the support team was coordinated and ready to execute their roles. Ryan had no idea that his entertainment weekend would be the last normal interaction he'd have before his carefully constructed life began falling apart. The night before we left for Vail, I lay awake listening to Ryan's peaceful breathing and thinking about how dramatically our lives would change over the next few days. The woman he'd married was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that some betrayals required consequences that matched their scope and cruelty. Tomorrow would begin the final performance of our marriage, but this time, Ryan would be the one providing entertainment for an audience he couldn't see or control. Justice, when properly orchestrated, could be more satisfying than any revenge because it served purposes beyond personal satisfaction. Ryan Mitchell was about to learn that underestimating the wrong woman could cost everything he'd worked to build, and the education would be delivered with the same systematic precision he'd once used to destroy my confidence and self-worth. The morning sun blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Vail resort suite as Ryan emerged from the bathroom, already dressed in his favorite hiking gear and radiating the kind of manic energy that usually preceded his most elaborate performances. He'd been unusually animated since we'd arrived the night before, texting constantly with Jake, Brad, and Tony about their planned activities for the weekend. "This is going to be epic," Ryan announced, checking his reflection in the mirror while adjusting his expensive outdoor jacket. "The guys have some amazing ideas for content, and the lighting up here is going to be perfect for videos." I forced enthusiasm into my voice while internally counting down the hours until our carefully orchestrated plan would begin. "What kind of content are you thinking about?" "Well, you know how you get when we're doing outdoor activities," Ryan grinned, pulling out his phone to show me a group chat filled with suggestions from his friends. "Remember that time you tried rock climbing in Boulder? The guys think we should recreate some of those classic Lisa moments." The memory of that humiliating afternoon flooded back instantly. Ryan had convinced me to try indoor rock climbing, then spent the entire session filming my struggles and fear responses while providing commentary for his friends' entertainment. The resulting videos had circulated through his social media for weeks, turning my genuine attempt to overcome my fear of heights into ongoing comedic material. "That could be fun," I replied, though the words tasted like poison. "I should probably practice some easier routes first, though." "That's the whole point," Ryan laughed, apparently delighted by my willingness to participate. "We want authentic reactions, not some polished performance. The guys are bringing professional cameras this time, so the quality is going to be incredible." The casual way he discussed filming my anticipated humiliation made my stomach churn, but I maintained my supportive facade. Rachel's recording equipment was already capturing every word of Ryan's planning, providing documentary evidence of his premeditated intentions to exploit and embarrass me for entertainment. Jake, Brad, and Tony arrived at our suite an hour later, carrying expensive camera equipment and enough alcohol to supply a small party. Their mood was festive and predatory, like hunters preparing for a particularly anticipated expedition. They greeted me with the kind of exaggerated friendliness that barely concealed their excitement about the day's planned entertainment. "Lisa!" Jake exclaimed, giving me an overly enthusiastic hug while Brad began setting up camera equipment. "Ready for an adventure? We've got some incredible activities planned." "I can't wait," I replied, my smile feeling like a mask stretched too tightly across my face. Ryan's been building up the suspense all morning. Tony was already testing camera angles while Brad arranged lighting equipment with professional precision. The level of preparation they'd invested in documenting my expected humiliation was both impressive and deeply disturbing. This wasn't casual teasing among friends. It was an orchestrated production designed to create maximum embarrassment. "We figured we'd start with some hiking to warm up," Brad explained, consulting notes on his phone. "There's this trail that has some challenging sections where we can really test Lisa's outdoor skills." The hiking trail they'd selected was significantly more difficult than anything I'd attempted before, winding through steep terrain with multiple technical sections. That would challenge experienced hikers. Ryan had chosen it specifically because he knew I'd struggle, providing ample opportunities for the kind of dramatic failure footage his friends wanted to capture. As we began the hike, the group positioned themselves strategically to document my difficulties. Jake led the way with Ryan, both of them maintaining a pace that was slightly too fast for comfort. Brad and Tony flanked me with cameras, ready to capture any stumbles, complaints, or moments of visible distress. The trail was beautiful but treacherous, with loose rocks and steep inclines that required careful navigation. Within the first hour, I'd provided exactly the kind of content they were hoping for, slipping on loose gravel, struggling with steep sections, and growing increasingly frustrated with the pace they'd set. "This is gold," Tony whispered to Brad during a water break, apparently forgetting that his camera's microphone was still recording. "She's already getting that red-faced, sweaty thing going." Ryan wasn't kidding about how funny she gets when she's struggling. Their commentary was cruel, but invaluable for our legal case. Every mocking observation, every gleeful reaction to my difficulties, every casual discussion of my humiliation was being documented by the very equipment they'd brought to exploit me. Rachel would have hours of high-quality footage showing the systematic nature of their harassment. The technical climbing section arrived after 3 hours of hiking, and Ryan's excitement was barely contained as he explained the challenge ahead. The route required navigating a series of rocky outcroppings using fixed ropes and basic climbing techniques, exactly the kind of activity guaranteed to trigger my fear of heights. "Don't worry, babe," Ryan said with false reassurance, already positioning his friends for optimal camera angles. "We'll talk you through every step. Just try to relax and trust the equipment." The climbing section was genuinely terrifying, not because of any real danger, but because of the psychological pressure of performing my fear for their entertainment. Every moment of hesitation, every expression of anxiety, every request for encouragement was met with barely concealed laughter and whispered commentary between the cameras. "Look at her face," Jake murmured to his camera during a particularly challenging section. "She's absolutely panicking. This is exactly what Ryan was talking about." By the time we reached the summit, I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. The magnificent mountain views that should have been rewarding felt hollow and bitter, poisoned by the knowledge that my struggle to reach them had been transformed into entertainment for people who claimed to care about me. Ryan was in his element, reviewing footage with his friends while I sat apart trying to recover from the ordeal. They replayed my moments of difficulty with increasing enthusiasm, already planning how to edit the material for maximum comedic impact. "The rope climbing sequence is going to be hilarious once we add some music," Brad observed, scrolling through his camera's display. And that moment where she almost cried? Pure comedy gold. Their complete lack of empathy or awareness of how their behavior affected me was stunning even after months of similar treatment. I was a real person sitting 10 feet away from them, but they discussed me like I was a fictional character whose suffering existed solely for their amusement. The descent was equally challenging, but less traumatic since most of their camera equipment was now packed away. Ryan seemed satisfied with the day's entertainment haul, chatting excitedly about editing techniques and social media strategies, while I focused on simply reaching the bottom without additional injury. Back at the resort, the group gathered in the main lodge to review their footage while I claimed exhaustion and retreated to our suite. The privacy gave me the first opportunity all day to process what had happened and confirm that Rachel's equipment had captured everything as planned. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. "Everything proceeding on schedule. Legal documents filed this morning. Ryan's world starts changing in approximately 4 hours." The message filled me with a mixture of anticipation and terror. While Ryan celebrated his successful day of humiliating me, legal machinery was already in motion that would fundamentally alter his life within hours. The divorce papers, protective orders, and financial investigations that had been weeks in preparation were now officially active. Daniel's team had coordinated the timing perfectly. Ryan's businesses would be served with financial audits first, thing Monday morning, while his personal assets would be frozen pending investigation of potential fraud. The IRS had been notified about possible tax violations, and his gym's licensing board would receive complaints about inappropriate conduct with clients. Most importantly, the criminal complaint about his recording activities had been filed with the Denver District Attorney's Office. Colorado's laws about consent for recording private conversations were clear and serious, carrying potential felony charges that could result in significant prison time. Ryan returned to our suite around midnight, flushed with alcohol and excitement. From reviewing the day's footage with his friends, he was in the mood for intimacy, apparently aroused by the successful humiliation session he'd orchestrated. The idea of physical contact with him made my skin crawl, but I needed to maintain the facade for a few more hours. "Today was incredible," Ryan said, pulling me close despite my obvious exhaustion. "The guys got some amazing footage, and I Think we might have enough material for a whole series of outdoor adventure videos. A series? I asked, though I dreaded hearing the answer. Yeah, we're thinking about making this a regular thing. Maybe monthly trips where we document your progress as you try different outdoor activities. The audience response is going to be huge. The casual way he discussed turning my ongoing humiliation into a recurring entertainment franchise was breathtaking in its cruelty. Ryan wasn't just planning to mock me once. He was envisioning a systematic campaign of public degradation that would continue indefinitely. That sounds like a lot of work, I managed, trying to discourage the idea without seeming uncooperative. Not really, Ryan replied, apparently interpreting my reluctance as modesty. The whole appeal is that it's authentic. We're not asking you to perform. We just want to capture your genuine reactions to challenging situations. His complete inability to understand why someone might not want their struggles documented and distributed for public mockery was characteristic of the narcissistic mindset that had driven his behavior throughout our marriage. In Ryan's universe, other people existed primarily as sources of entertainment or validation for his ego. Sunday morning brought news that accelerated our timeline in unexpected ways. While Ryan showered, I received an urgent call from Rachel reporting that Jake Peterson had been arrested during the night on unrelated charges involving his business dealings. The arrest would likely trigger scrutiny of his partnership with Ryan, potentially exposing financial irregularities sooner than we'd anticipated. The timing is actually perfect, Rachel explained. Jake's legal troubles will distract Ryan and create additional pressure on his business operations. When our legal actions begin tomorrow, he'll already be dealing with crisis management. The idea that Jake's arrest was coincidental seemed impossible given the careful planning of our campaign, but Rachel assured me that they'd had nothing to do with his legal troubles. Sometimes justice aligned in unexpected ways that served multiple purposes simultaneously. Ryan emerged from the shower to find multiple missed calls and urgent text messages about Jake's situation. His mood shifted instantly from satisfied contentment to anxious crisis management as he began making calls to lawyers and business associates. "What the hell happened?" Ryan demanded into his phone, pacing around our suite while I pretended to sleep. "How is that even possible? We need to meet as soon as we get back to Denver." The conversation revealed that Jake's arrest involved allegations of fraud related to their gym equipment financing. Exactly the kind of financial irregularity that Daniel's forensic accountant had identified during her investigation. Ryan's panic was immediate and comprehensive as he began to understand the potential implications for their shared business operations. "This is going to be a disaster," Ryan muttered after ending his call. "If Jake goes down, he could take the whole business with him. We need damage control, and we need it immediately." The crisis management consumed Ryan's attention for the remainder of our trip, transforming him from confident entertainer to anxious businessman dealing with an existential threat to his livelihood. He barely spoke to me during the drive back to Denver, his mind completely focused on the legal and financial challenges that were multiplying by the hour. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a military operation. While Ryan rushed to emergency meetings with lawyers and accountants, multiple legal documents were being served at his business locations and our apartment. The timing ensured that he would be distracted and off balance when the full scope of his problems became clear. The divorce papers were delivered to his gym at 9 a.m., along with temporary restraining orders that prohibited him from contacting me directly or disposing of any marital assets. The forensic accounting firm arrived an hour later with court orders, authorizing examination of all business financial records, while the Colorado Department of Revenue began its own investigation of potential tax fraud. By noon, Ryan's phone was buzzing constantly with calls from lawyers, business partners, and clients who had learned about the various legal actions through social media and local business networks. The careful reputation he'd built over years of charming social media presence was evaporating as news of his legal troubles spread through Denver's interconnected professional community. Maggie had arranged for me to spend Monday at her estate, safely removed from any potential confrontation, while monitoring Ryan's reaction to the coordinated assault on his life. Her security team provided regular updates on his movements and communications, ensuring that I remained protected while watching justice unfold. "He's beginning to understand the scope of what's happening," Maggie observed as we reviewed the morning's developments. Multiple legal actions, financial investigations, and social exposure all occurring simultaneously. It's exactly what abusers fear most: loss of control and public accountability. The criminal complaint about Ryan's recording activities had been forwarded to a detective specializing in domestic abuse cases. Detective Maria Santos was already reviewing the evidence Rachel had gathered, including the audio recordings from our Vail trip that documented Ryan's premeditated plans to humiliate me for entertainment. "The recordings from this weekend are particularly damaging," Detective Santos explained during a phone briefing. "They show clear intent to exploit and embarrass you, along with evidence of ongoing conspiracy with his friends to create content from your suffering." The criminal case would take months to develop fully, but the immediate impact on Ryan's reputation and business relationships was devastating. Several of his gym clients had already canceled their memberships after learning about the allegations, while potential business partners were distancing themselves from his operations. Social media amplified the damage as news of Ryan's legal troubles spread through Denver's fitness and business communities. The same platforms he'd used to mock and humiliate me were now broadcasting his downfall to everyone who had witnessed his previous behavior. "The beautiful irony," Maggie noted as we watched Ryan's social media mentions multiply throughout the day, "is that his own documentation of abusive behavior is being used as evidence against him. Every post, every video, every public mockery of you is now part of the legal record." Ryan's attempts to manage the crisis were chaotic and ineffective. His calls to me went unanswered due to the restraining orders, while his efforts to communicate through mutual friends were unsuccessful because most of our social circle had already chosen sides based on the evidence they'd seen. By Tuesday morning, the local news had picked up the story of Ryan's legal troubles, particularly the criminal charges related to recording private conversations without consent. The coverage was factual but devastating, describing him as a local businessman accused of systematically abusing and exploiting his spouse for entertainment purposes. The news coverage triggered additional complaints from former clients and employees who had previously been reluctant to speak publicly about Ryan's behavior. Women began coming forward with accounts of inappropriate conduct during training sessions, unwanted commentary about their bodies, and pressure to participate in social media content that made them uncomfortable. "This is how these situations typically develop," Detective Santos explained during another update call. "Once one victim comes forward publicly, others find the courage to share their experiences. Ryan's pattern of behavior is becoming undeniable." The cascade of accusations and legal troubles was overwhelming Ryan's ability to respond effectively. His lawyers were stretched thin, dealing with criminal charges, civil litigation, business investigations, and regulatory complaints, all simultaneously. The coordinated timing of our legal strategy was preventing him from focusing his resources on any single threat. Wednesday brought news that Ryan's primary gym location was being foreclosed on due to missed loan payments, apparently the result of Jake's arrest freezing their business accounts. The financial investigation had revealed that their expansion had been funded through questionable practices that violated several lending agreements. Ryan's entire empire was built on leveraged debt and creative accounting, the forensic accountant reported. Once the financial scrutiny began, the whole structure started collapsing like a house of cards. The business collapse was accelerating beyond even our most optimistic projections. Ryan's partners were abandoning him to protect their own interests. His creditors were demanding immediate payment, and his insurance companies were investigating potential fraud that could void his coverage. Most satisfying of all, Ryan's friends who had participated in his campaign of mockery were distancing themselves as quickly as possible. Jake was dealing with his own legal troubles, while Brad and Tony were desperately trying to avoid being associated with the criminal charges related to the recording activities. The loyalty among abusers and their enablers evaporates instantly when consequences arrive, Dr. Martinez observed during one of our therapy sessions. They were happy to participate in cruelty when it seemed risk-free, but they have no interest in facing accountability for their actions. Thursday morning brought the news I'd been anticipating with a mixture of dread and satisfaction. Ryan had been arrested at his apartment on charges related to illegal recording and domestic abuse. The arrest was conducted professionally, but publicly, ensuring that his remaining clients and business associates would learn about his criminal status immediately. The photos of Ryan in handcuffs outside our former apartment building appeared on social media within hours, providing a stark contrast to the confident, successful image he'd cultivated for years. The man who had derived pleasure from my public humiliation was now experiencing his own devastating exposure. Justice has a way of bringing things full circle, Maggie said as we reviewed the news coverage together. Ryan spent months recording and broadcasting your private moments for entertainment. Now his arrest and downfall are being documented and shared by people who understand exactly what kind of person he really is. The criminal charges were serious enough to require significant bail, which Ryan was unable to post due to his frozen assets and lack of friends willing to help. He would remain in custody pending trial, giving me additional security during the transition period, while his life continued to collapse around him. The weekend brought a strange sense of completion as I walked through Maggie's estate gardens, processing the magnitude of change that had occurred in less than a week. Ryan Mitchell, the man who had systematically destroyed my confidence and self-worth, was now facing criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and complete social ostracism. "How do you feel about what we've accomplished?" Maggie asked as we sat by her pool, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. "Powerful," I replied, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. For the first time in years, I feel like I have control over my own life and future. The transformation from victim to victor had been complete and irreversible. The woman who had stood frozen in that Cherry Creek Mall food court was gone, forever, replaced by someone who understood that some betrayals required consequences that matched their scope and cruelty. Ryan's world had collapsed with the same systematic precision he'd once used to undermine mine, but the destruction served purposes beyond personal satisfaction. Other women would be protected from his manipulation. His enablers would think twice before participating in similar cruelty, and the broader community would understand that emotional abuse carried real consequences. Justice, when properly orchestrated, was indeed more satisfying than any revenge, because it served the greater good while providing personal vindication. Ryan Mitchell had learned that underestimating the wrong woman could cost everything he'd worked to build, and the lesson would resonate far beyond our personal relationship. 6 months after Ryan's arrest, I stood in the executive conference room of Thompson Industries, overlooking downtown Denver through floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected my new reality back at me. The woman in the glass wore a tailored navy suit that commanded respect, her posture radiating the kind of confidence that came from surviving hell and emerging stronger on the other side. Maggie sat across from me at the polished mahogany table, reviewing contracts that would formalize our new business partnership. "The Chen-Thompson Digital Alliance has a nice ring to it," Maggie said with satisfaction, sliding the final documents across the table for my signature. "Though I suspect we'll need to expand our office space sooner than projected, given the client interest we're already generating." The partnership had evolved naturally from our alliance against Ryan into a legitimate business collaboration that leveraged both my digital marketing expertise and Maggie's extensive network of corporate connections. What had begun as justice had transformed into opportunity, creating something meaningful from the ashes of my destroyed marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel Hayes confirming that Ryan's plea hearing was scheduled for the following Weak. The criminal case had progressed exactly as predicted, with mounting evidence making trial increasingly untenable for his defense team. 3 additional women had come forward with similar stories of recording abuse and public humiliation, creating a pattern that prosecutors described as overwhelming and systematic. "Any regrets about accepting the plea agreement?" Maggie asked, noting my expression as I read Daniel's message. "None whatsoever," I replied without hesitation. 5 years in federal prison plus lifetime registration as a domestic violence offender serves our purposes perfectly. Ryan will never be able to hide his true nature from future partners, and the prison time ensures he can't retaliate while I'm building my new life. The plea agreement had been carefully negotiated to include provisions that went far beyond typical domestic abuse cases. Ryan would be required to surrender all recordings he'd made of private conversations, participate in mandatory psychological counseling, and maintain no contact with me or any of his other documented victims. Most importantly, the felony conviction would prevent him from obtaining business licenses in any industry involving personal services or client trust. Jake Peterson had received an even harsher sentence after his financial fraud trial, effectively ending the business partnership that had enabled much of Ryan's abusive behavior. Brad Williams had lost his pharmaceutical sales job after his employer learned about his participation in the recording conspiracy, while Tony Rodriguez had been quietly terminated from his software engineering position for similar reasons. The ripple effects continue to spread, Maggie observed as we reviewed news clippings about the case that had become something of a landmark in Colorado's approach to emotional abuse prosecution. 3 other men in Denver have been charged with similar recording violations since Ryan's arrest. The legal precedent we established is protecting women across the state. The broader impact of our legal strategy had exceeded even Maggie's ambitious goals. The case had generated significant media attention, leading to legislative discussions about strengthening Colorado's privacy laws and expanding the definition of domestic abuse to include systematic emotional manipulation. Several law schools were already using the case materials to teach students about innovative approaches to prosecuting non-physical abuse. My own testimony during the legal proceedings had been cathartic and empowering in ways I hadn't expected. Standing before a judge and jury, describing Ryan's calculated campaign of humiliation with calm precision, had felt like reclaiming my voice after months of being reduced to a punchline. The recording evidence had been so comprehensive that Ryan's defense attorney had advised him to plead guilty rather than subject him to the public examination of his cruelty. "The victim impact statement you delivered was extraordinary," Daniel had told me after the sentencing hearing. "I've seen many abuse cases, but your ability to articulate the systematic nature of psychological manipulation was uniquely powerful." The judge specifically mentioned your testimony when explaining the harsh sentence. Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that my healing process would continue long after the legal proceedings concluded. The therapy sessions had evolved from crisis management to personal development, focusing on rebuilding the confidence and self-worth that Ryan had systematically destroyed. Trauma recovery isn't linear, Dr. Martinez had explained during one of our recent sessions. But you've demonstrated remarkable resilience in transforming a devastating experience into meaningful action. That transformation is often the most powerful form of healing. The transformation had indeed been profound and multifaceted. My business had expanded beyond anything I'd achieved during my marriage, partly due to Maggie's resources and connections, but primarily because I'd rediscovered the entrepreneurial confidence that Ryan had spent years undermining. Clients responded to my restored assertiveness and creativity, leading to contract opportunities that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The financial settlement from my divorce had been more generous than expected, partly due to Ryan's inability to hide assets during his criminal proceedings, but mostly because his legal troubles had made defending the divorce case impossible. I'd recovered not just my contributions to our shared expenses, but additional compensation for the emotional distress and business damage his abuse had caused. More importantly, I'd gained something that couldn't be quantified in monetary terms. The knowledge that I was capable of fighting back effectively when wronged. The helpless woman who had endured months of public mockery was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use it when necessary. My relationship with my family had strengthened significantly as they witnessed my transformation from victim to advocate. Emma had been particularly supportive, attending court proceedings and helping me process the emotional complexity of watching justice unfold in real time. "I'm proud of how you've handled all of this," Emma had said after Ryan's sentencing. "But I'm even more proud of who you've become. This experience revealed strength I'm not sure even you knew you possessed." The social dynamics in Denver's Itai, business and fitness communities had shifted dramatically in the wake of Ryan's downfall. Women who had previously been reluctant to speak about inappropriate behavior or boundary violations began sharing their experiences more openly, creating an environment where such conduct was less likely to be tolerated or ignored. Several of Ryan's former clients had reached out to thank me for coming forward, explaining that my willingness to pursue legal action had validated their own experiences and given them courage to set boundaries in other relationships. The ripple effects of holding one abuser accountable had created positive changes that extended far beyond my personal situation. "You've become something of a local hero," Maggie noted as we reviewed speaking requests from women's organizations and business groups wanting to hear about my experience. "The story of how you transformed from victim to victor is inspiring people across the country." The speaking opportunities had been unexpected but deeply meaningful. Sharing my story with other women who were experiencing similar manipulation helped them recognize patterns they might not have identified on their own. Several had contacted me months later to report that my presentation had given them courage to leave abusive relationships or pursue legal action against partners who were violating their privacy and dignity. The most satisfying correspondence had come from a woman in California whose husband had been showing intimate videos of her to his friends for entertainment. My story had helped her understand that such behavior was both criminal and divorce-worthy, leading to legal action that resulted in both criminal conviction and a substantial financial settlement. "The beautiful thing about justice," Maggie had observed during one of our business meetings, "is that it creates a multiplier effect. Every abuser who faces real consequences makes other potential abusers think twice about their behavior. What we accomplished with Ryan is protecting women we'll never meet from experiences we'll never know about." The anniversary of the Cherry Creek Mall incident arrived on a crisp autumn morning that reminded me of the day my marriage had effectively ended. Instead of marking the occasion with sadness or anger, I chose to celebrate it as the beginning of my transformation into someone who refused to accept unacceptable treatment. I spent the morning at our new office space, a beautifully appointed suite in the same building where I'd first met with Daniel Hayes. The contrast between my desperate state during that initial legal consultation and my current position of strength and success felt almost miraculous in its scope. My assistant knocked on my office door to announce that someone was requesting to see me without an appointment. She says her name is Nicole Peterson and that it's about a personal matter involving her husband. Jake Peterson's wife had never contacted me during his legal proceedings, but her presence in my office suggested that his prison sentence hadn't resolved all the consequences of his association with Ryan's abusive behavior. Nicole appeared nervous and embarrassed as she entered my office, carrying herself with the defensive posture I recognized from my own recent past. "I'm sorry to bother you without calling first," Nicole began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what Jake did was terrible, and I understand if you don't want to speak with me, but I found something in his belongings that I think you should know about." She produced a laptop bag containing what appeared to be extensive files related to Ryan's recording activities. The materials included not just the videos from our Vail trip, but numerous other recordings spanning several years, documenting a pattern of behavior that was even more systematic and extensive than we'd realized. Jake kept everything, Nicole explained as I examined the files with growing horror and fascination. Every recording, every planning session, every discussion about how to humiliate you and other women. I found it all after his arrest, and I've been agonizing about what to do with it. The additional evidence was staggering in its scope and detail. Ryan and his friends had been documenting their entertainment sessions with military-like precision, creating archives of humiliation content that revealed the calculated nature of their psychological abuse. The materials would be valuable for ongoing legal proceedings and potentially helpful for other victims seeking justice. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Because I was married to someone who thought it was funny to watch women suffer," Nicole replied, her voice strengthening with each word. "I enabled his behavior by staying silent, and I can't live with that anymore. If these materials can help other women avoid what you went through, then sharing them is the least I can do." Nicole's decision to come forward represented another victory in the broader war against the kind of systematic abuse that thrived in silence and complicity. Her willingness to expose her ex-husband's behavior despite personal cost demonstrated that the courage to seek justice could be contagious. "Thank you for bringing this to me," I said, meaning it completely. "And Nicole? Don't underestimate the strength it took to walk through that door today. Recognition and action are the first steps toward healing." After Nicole left, I called Daniel to arrange for the additional evidence to be submitted to prosecutors who were investigating similar cases in other jurisdictions. The materials would likely lead to additional charges and victims receiving justice they might not have achieved otherwise. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new downtown apartment, looking out at the Denver skyline that sparkled with promise and possibility. The space was entirely mine, decorated according to my preferences and filled with furniture that reflected my personality rather than compromises made to accommodate someone else's taste. My phone rang with a call from a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar when I answered. Stephanie, the young trainer who had witnessed my humiliation at Cherry Creek Mall and inadvertently set everything in motion by telling her mother Maggie about what she'd seen. "I wanted to call and thank you," Stephanie said, her voice warm with genuine gratitude. "What you did changed everything for so many women in this city. I have friends who left abusive relationships because your story gave them courage to recognize that they deserved better treatment." The conversation reminded me that my transformation from victim to victor had never been just about personal vindication. Every woman who found courage through my example, every abuser who faced consequences for their behavior, every enabler who reconsidered their complicity represented progress toward a world where emotional abuse carried real costs. Later that night, I received an email from the producer of a national television show requesting an interview about my experience and its broader implications for domestic abuse prosecution. The request was flattering, but also represented an opportunity to amplify the message that systematic humiliation and privacy violations were serious crimes deserving serious consequences. "Are you interested in national exposure?" Maggie asked when I called to discuss the opportunity. "The story has enough power to influence legislation and legal precedent across the country." The decision felt significant, but not difficult. My comfort with public speaking had grown tremendously through the court proceedings and local presentations, and the chance to protect women in other states from experiences similar to mine was worth any personal discomfort. "Let's do it," I replied, "but I want to make sure the focus remains on the legal and social changes that need to happen, not just on the personal drama of my situation." 3 weeks later, I sat across from a nationally renowned journalist in a television studio, wearing a confident smile and the kind of designer suit that represented everything I'd become since escaping Ryan's influence. The interview was professional and impactful, focusing on the legal innovations our case had pioneered rather than sensationalizing the personal details of my abuse. "What would you say to women who are experiencing similar treatment but don't believe they have the resources to fight back?" the journalist asked during the final segment. I would tell them that they're stronger than they realize and that help is available if they're willing to seek it, I replied, looking directly into the camera. Emotional abuse thrives in isolation and silence. The moment you start documenting the behavior and reaching out for support, you begin taking your power back. The interview generated significant response, including calls from women across the country who recognized their own experiences in my story. Several contacted Maggie's foundation with requests for legal referrals and financial assistance, creating opportunities to extend our model of comprehensive victim support to other jurisdictions. A year after Ryan's imprisonment, I received a letter from him forwarded through Daniel's office. The handwriting was careful and subdued, lacking the aggressive confidence that had characterized his communication during our marriage. The content was predictably self-serving, filled with apologies that felt more strategic than genuine, and requests for forgiveness that ignored the systematic nature of his behavior. Some people never truly understand the impact of their actions. Dr. Martinez observed when I brought the letter to our session. Ryan's focus on his own suffering, rather than the harm he caused, suggests that prison hasn't fundamentally changed his character. The important thing is that his ability to harm others has been eliminated. I chose not to respond to Ryan's letter, recognizing that any communication would only provide him with attention and validation he didn't deserve. The chapter of my life that included him was closed permanently, and I had no interest in reopening it even briefly. Instead, I focused my energy on the thriving business partnership with Maggie and the expanding opportunities to help other women navigate similar challenges. The Chen Thompson Digital Alliance had grown beyond marketing consultation to include advocacy work and legal support for abuse survivors seeking justice. "You've built something remarkable from the ashes of a terrible experience," Maggie said, during our year-end business review. The foundation work alone has helped over 200 women across 12 states pursue legal action against abusive partners. That's a legacy worth celebrating. The metrics of success were indeed impressive, but the real satisfaction came from individual messages and calls from women whose lives had been changed by our work. Each successful prosecution, each protective order obtained, each woman who found courage to leave an abusive relationship represented a victory against the kind of systematic cruelty that had once defined my own existence. Standing in my office, 2 years after that humiliating day at Cherry Creek Mall, I reflected on the journey that had transformed me from victim to advocate to successful entrepreneur. The woman who had once stood frozen while her husband entertained his friends with recordings of her private conversations was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that some betrayals could become the foundation for extraordinary achievements. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma announcing that she was engaged to a wonderful man who treated her with respect and genuine affection. The news filled me with joy not just for her happiness, but for the reminder that healthy relationships were possible when both partners valued each other's dignity and well-being. Ryan Mitchell had intended to reduce me to nothing more than entertainment for his friends, but his cruelty had inadvertently revealed strength and resources I didn't know I possessed. Justice, when properly pursued, had indeed proved more satisfying than any revenge because it served purposes that extended far beyond personal vindication. The Denver skyline glittered in the late afternoon sun, reflecting my transformed reality back at me through the windows of an office that represented everything I'd built from the ruins of my marriage. Sometimes the best revenge truly was living, powerfully, using the strength gained from betrayal to ensure that others never had to face the same darkness alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.